Welcome to TORAH Talk. I am your host, wil'Liam, broadcasting live out of Kingsland, Texas, USA, with episode number 21 of Controversial Issues with Rabbi Chaim Coffman from the Holy Land. Welcome back to the show. Rabbi, how are you? It's good to see you back again. Hold on, I can't find my music button. We've had a little bit of a situation for the past months and months and months with callers. When they call in, they were hearing an echo. And I couldn't figure out, I don't know anything about soundboards. I just know there's a couple knobs you turn, and there's 4 or 5 wires. That's the best I got. You know, when I start seeing wires and hoses coming from everywhere, I start to panic, and I just ignore that they're there, and it makes it all go away. Or not. But anyway, so a friend who I was basically connected with for the first time this week just so happens to be a sound technician, and he specializes in this type of stuff, and he taught me more about this soundboard in like 5 to 7 minutes than I've learned in 2 years. I know that's crazy, but it's definitely true. So thank you for helping me with that, Mr. Mitch Houston. So very good, very good. It was good to see you, Rabbi. So I guess before we get kicked off, there was some feedback. I thought they were going to try to execute you after the last show. And so, calling, what kind of rabbi would call, the military like a brothel? And, the thing is, I kind of got the reference a little bit because, here's the thing with me. I've seen a lot of different types of situations to be very unhealthy. One of them is for sure, absolutely, hands down, just about every college story I've ever heard from anybody going to college. Yes, they learned, but the most exciting parts wasn't what they learned. It was all the fun stuff they did, and all the chaos that happened. And so, thinking about that, it didn't offend me when you said that. Even if I was, Jewish, living in the land, whatever the case may be, I still don't think that would have offended me. I would have just probably tried to reason with what you said and find out what you were meaning by it. And I think I do understand what you're saying, and I kind of see how that could be, seen as an issue. And so, but with that said, I'll let you take a few moments and talk about, clarify whatever it is that you want to do regarding last week's show, and then we'll move on to the topics for tonight, which are sure to be very interesting. So, Rabbi, you got the screen, sir.
All right, always a pleasure to be here. As as most people know, this is controversial issues, so we're not necessarily controversial just to be controversial, but I just want to clarify. I'm not gonna destroy my own reputation by apologizing. That would go out the window. I just want to make sure that people understand clear, and that is that that reference of saying that the army is a brothel, and what goes on there. So I made clear, or now I want to make absolutely clear, that on the books, here in Israel, a woman is allowed and will be paid by the government to have up to 3 abortions. Now, I didn't say every woman in the army has 3 abortions. Right. I tried to make that. I tried to make that clear. So I want to make, absolutely crystal clear. A woman who goes in is not having 3 abortions. The point is that if she did get pregnant in the army, then the government would pay up to 3. Now, the obvious question on that is, so why is that?
Right.
In other words, if she's in the army and the government is willing to pay for that, obviously this is going on. Right? Obviously, this is an issue. Now, when I went to college or university, depending what you want to call it, so, I don't know people that had, 3 abortions, 5 abortions, or whatever the case is, but make no mistake, we weren't living in Victorian England, right? Make no mistake, there were things that were going on, whether it was, drug usage, whether it was, promiscuity or anything else. It definitely does. It does exist in the culture. I don't think we're going to stick our head, in the ground like as an ostrich, and we're going to say, oh, really, nothing happens. Everybody goes in and comes out exactly the same. Well, I don't think that is, true. And if a woman, hasn't lost her virginity while in high school, then certainly in college. Now, does that mean that someone goes through college is not going to lose their virginity? There are people like that. That's not, that's probably 100% true, but probably the vast majority are not.
Right.
Right. There's just, there is the reality. I'm not saying, oh, women do this and women do that. There is a reality. Statistics will definitely bear that out.
The thing that stands out strange to me is that they would pay for 3, not 1. Like, not if you accidentally get, but this is that it's so much of an occurrence that they had to up their offer to not twice, but even a 3rd time of pregnancy while you're in the military. And so, I mean, to me, just that alone says a lot, way worse than I actually thought before you even told me that. I was like, wow, that's even worse than I thought. So, anyway, go ahead.
I mean, that's not just, that's not by, that's not only by the Israeli military. I'm sure that, in other militaries in the world, forget whether whether they'll pay for an abortion or whether they won't, I can guarantee 100% that, this is what's going on. And, it's not, you get, the Navy is notorious, as most people probably know. They're out on, in the boats or whatever for long periods of time. They come in, what are they doing? Again, I'm not saying, I'm not saying every single person, is immoral, but, the depictions of what people do, I think are, I definitely think are, pretty obvious. So, within society itself, which is a much bigger issue, which we're not going to get into, but, within society itself, within the workplace and other things, there are all kinds of issues, certainly between men and women. You put them on, in a college campus, you put them in other, in other circumstances. So, what do we think is going to happen? You have to go back and again, you have to go back and watch When Harry Met Sally. So,
okay, now let me ask you a question. Is it fair? Yeah. Is it fair to overgeneralize or make that as a blanket statement? Would it be more accurate to say, hey, 80% of those join the military are really straightforward, right up, and only a 15% or 5%, those are the ones that fall within the 3 abortion scenario with the man and the woman, So what's the fairest way to approach it?
So someone would say the fairest way is you shouldn't make such a general blanket statement. That's what.
Okay, good.
Good. That's what I was taken to to task for.
I would agree.
How could you make?
Honestly, I would agree. I'm trying.
How could you make such a blanket statement? So the point was that places like this are a bastion for immorality. And to prove the point, that's the only, that was the only thing I tried to do, was to prove the point, to show how immoral it is, to show you that there are, this is what the government is willing to pay for. So you can say, wow, that's a general blanket statement, but why is it on the books?
Right. Interesting.
Why is it on the books? You can't make a general statement like that. You can't say women are this, that, and the other thing.
Right.
You can't go out and say, that. Now, okay, maybe that's true, but at the same time, added for emphasis, this is what's on the books. So if you want to tell me, well, 5% of women, or 10% of women, in the Army get abortion. I don't know what the percentage is, and it doesn't really matter what the percentage is. The fact that it's on the books, that's enough.
Right. Okay. Well,
I don't. That's it.
That's good.
So
that's good. It was good to clarify. Absolutely good to clarify. Also good to note, maybe it's not the best thing to have a blanket statement or to overgeneralize, but it is real. It does happen, and it's on the books. There you go. Okay, so let's take the remaining 50 minutes of our show and let's hammer out some really cool topics that you had sent to me. This is pretty interesting. Tell us more precisely the title about the ger, or the goy, however you want to say that. The claim, what was it Michael Faircloth had brought up, or he had questioned you about? What was the actual statement?
Well, there were a few. One there's a Talmudic decree over non-Jewish girls that they have the status of nida, or what I'll say as spiritual cooties when they are born, like when they're first born, which at face value doesn't make a whole lot of sense. another statement about the fact that non-Jews are suspect on bestiality.
Well, explain
Right?
that. Wait, explain what you just said. They're suspect on bestiality. What do you mean by that?
It was a common practice. The Talmud says that if a person left an animal with an idolater, right, someone who's an idolater, it was common for them to be involved in bestiality, right? That is the statement. In other words, you don't leave an animal with a non-Jew, because let's say, you stopped at an inn, you stayed overnight, you're going to leave, you came with your wagon, your animal, whatever animals, that you came with and how you got there. Don't leave the animals alone with a non-Jew, because it was common practice that they were involved in bestiality.
Interesting.
Now, you take that statement at face value, that looks pretty bad. That definitely looks pretty bad. So one opinion there is that this is a minority opinion. In other words, the statement, you have to understand how Talmudic logic works. In other words, you have the Mishnah, which is a commentary on the Torah. The Gemara is a commentary on the Mishnah. The Mishnah and the Gemara together make up what we call the Talmud. Right? So the Mishnah will make a statement, and and it'll give, potentially various opinions on certain things, and then the Talmud will flush it out. The Gemara will flush it out. No, you can't say like this because someone said like that, or there's a contradiction. There are other things going on, to go off on a tangent, tell you a story. All these different type of things, but it doesn't leave the statement out there, hanging. This is an issue. What people do is, we spoke, many weeks ago about oral tradition, and how it works. And, there'll be a statement and someone will say, oh, look, the rabbis say this, and look at this statement. But there's always a but, right? You say,
Right.
But, but what? So you cannot, there are many things that you cannot take out of context. If you take it out of context, then that's exactly what you've done. But when you have a whole list of statements that seemingly, go against logic, at least our own ideas or our own logic, we have to figure out exactly, we have to put our mindset, back into, God's law, and this is what it is. So when you see a statement like that, say, oh, look, the Talmud's racist. Well, it could be. Right, the Talmud may be racist. People will say it's anti-pig. We have kashrut laws. We're anti-non-Jews. We're anti all kinds of things. That could be true. The question is, what does it mean? You can't just leave a statement and let it hang there and say, oh, look, the Talmud is this. That's not true. Right? You have to understand. We have to understand what it means. So one possible explanation, right, as the Talmud as is brought down, this is a minority opinion. In other words, there are many times that the Talmud will clarify that you have two opinions, or three opinions, let's say, and the Talmud, will say we hold like, X opinion, or even if it's not codified clearly, right? The earlier and later commentaries will say this is how we hold because of whatever reason. There are general rules, how to learn as well. It's not for the topic at hand, but there is Talmudic logic and how it's brought down throughout the generations. So people will say, okay, it's on the books. This is what it says. How do you get out of it? You're going to try now and duck out of it and say, oh, look, it's a minority opinion. Right? That is one possible explanation. Another is that possibly this was limited to a specific time and place where they were suspect. In other words, it was very common, during that time. If you look at, again, I'll make an overgeneralization here, but if you look at Roman times, right, what destroyed the Romans, when they were at the height of their power, 100% was decadence. Right? They just, bestiality, fighting naked, the gymnasium, all kinds of other things that really destroyed the Roman Empire from within. So one opinion is that this was common, right? So you might say, well, it was only common in that time. It's not common, it's not as common today. Okay, that may be true, right? But we're, the rabbis are commenting what's going on in their, in their time. So that's another, that's another opinion. A third opinion is not only was it so common, but it was so widespread that they were suspect on animals everywhere. So you have three opinions. Either one was it's at that time and place. One is it's a minority opinion and it didn't apply to everybody, certainly. The third opinion is that it was so widespread, you don't leave an animal with a non-Jew ever, right? It was a common, it was a statement about a reality, right? They want to say, wow, it's an overgeneralization. That's not true, right? In this case, this is what happened. You left an animal with a non-Jew, 98% of the time, this is what happened. Oh, that's a terrible statement. This is what went on. This is this was a common, a common thing. So you might say, well, today maybe things have changed. You can't say it's 98%.
Sure,
yeah, it's probably, may not even be 30%.
Right.
So it may be a totally different thing, but, we're not living in Victorian England anymore, Toto. So, it does exist. Bestiality, definitely exists. Well, this next week's Torah portion speaks about Bil'Liam, right? Bil'Liam, had his donkey that he went with everywhere, and it is brought down that, when the donkey, gets stuck between before a wall, he sees an angel,
right.
This fiery angel with the sword, and Bil'Liam kicks it, a bunch of times and says, move. And God opens up the donkey's mouth, and says I can't move, don't you see what's in front of me? But the Medrash over there says that, the donkey says, I've been with you throughout thick and thin, throughout my life. And, that means they've been together, in the biblical sense. They've been together. So there are a bunch of different reasons, why that was. Now, you see that it was not so uncommon, right? For that, they say, oh, look, non-Jewish prophet, the Torah wants to make him look bad. Well, you can take that out of context also, right? But, in Kabbalistic terms and other terms, yeah, there was good reason why he did what he did. He wanted to tap into the other side so bad, in order to have, so much power over these negative spiritual forces. This was one way to do it. Other people hung out in graveyards, slept in graveyards, the Talmud says. There are different ways to put inside a person or, to give them this experience of having such a powerful, what I'll say, tuning into the dark side, or as I'm from Boston, the dark side, right? You come into the dark side, and what that does is it has, gives the person a tremendous amount of negative spiritual power. So they say, oh, look, we're making the one non-Jewish prophet look bad. Again, there's a reality, right? It's not a question of, or the Muslims will say how the Jews reinterpreted, the Torah to make them look bad because look what happened to Yishmael, right? Look what happened to, the son of Abraham and Hagar, and that the genealogy that we go through goes through Yitzchak and not through Yishmael. Yishmael definitely does not look good, that's for sure, right? There are good reasons why the Torah comes out and says that he's a wild man and all these other things. So they'll claim, look, you're making us look bad. But, the Torah is if it's a book that's given by God and Moshe wrote it down, so Moshe's writing down what the reality is. There's idolatry, there's promiscuity, there's bestiality, there's don't allow witches to live, witchcraft, sorcery, all that is bad. Well, how does the Torah know that? Maybe we're all anti all these different things, but there is a reality. You tune into these, these terrible things. So, these things, God's telling you this is not a good thing. right? This is something I do not want you to practice. People say, wow, God, you're so terrible. Look, what are you, a fanatic? You think all these things are bad? Well, God wrote the book himself. He gave it over to Moshe himself. I think he knew what he was doing, right? So that's one thing, by bestiality. I just want to, someone actually told me I should actually quote the sources. This is Avodah Zarah 22a to 22b. On 22b,
the Talmud.
it speaks about immorality. It speaks, in the Talmud,
Okay,
right?
thank you.
It speaks, and that's what we're speaking about, right? Hey, where am I? What topic is this? Why did you oversleep, huh? Anyway, the Talmud speaks there on 22b, Tractate of Avodah Zarah, about the immorality of idolaters. Now, again, this is not an overgeneral statement. This is a reality. They often committed adultery. Now, this is pretty wild also, so keep that TORAH Talk hat on, right? Not only does it say that they were immoral, but and they often committed adultery. Oh, look at that. Non-Jews commit adultery. What a terrible statement. Well, there was a reality, at the time. I mean, there's a lot that goes on today also. So this is not this is what was going on at the time. And the Talmud says it was so bad that if he couldn't find his wife, in other words, if his wife wasn't around, she went out, and he couldn't be with her, let's say it was that time of the month, he couldn't be with her, then what would he do? He may find the Jew's animal and sodomize it.
Oh, wow.
Now, that is
right.
Now, I could not make this up. You can't blame me. This is what the Talmud says. If his wife wasn't around for whatever reason, she goes on vacation, or she couldn't be with him, she had spiritual cooties, we'll call it, whatever the case is, then he may find a Jew's animal and sodomize it. So now there's an obvious question: why would a non-Jew prefer a Jew's animal? Well, one question is, why would he go to an animal, not just go for another woman? But why would he prefer a Jew's animal, instead of his own animal, right?
Yeah.
So the rabbis here learn. Now we're going to get pretty wild here. The rabbis learn that there's something what we call zahuma. Zahuma means impurity. It's talking there about the impurity of the snake. We once spoke way back when, about fallen angels, and you have to go back and see that video. But we spoke about whether angels have free will, right? So the obvious question is, well, what about go back to Genesis, and you see the story with the snake and Adam and Eve. So did the snake have free will? The snake, we understand, is the evil inclination, is Mr. Sutton himself, Mr. Satan, we'll call Mr. S, right? What does he do in this world, right? What he does in this world is causes people, he puts people in situations, gives them thoughts, other things, whatever, in order for them to reach their potential. But also, his job is, to see where they're holding what they're doing, to make sure, where they're going to go in the future. In other words, what they're going to do, how they're going to do it, to try and sort of trap them, and put them in situations to help them reach their potential.
I kind of refer to Satan as Inspector 12.
We go back to Inspector Gadget. Anyway, the one time in history that we actually got to the place where before Adam and Eve had sinned was giving the Torah Mount Sinai. When the Jewish people got to Mount Sinai, they had actually hit that level, of where the world was from the very beginning, before Adam and Eve ate from the tree, right? So what happened right after that? Right after that, you have the sin of the golden calf. So you didn't have that much time in the world where the world, was at that point, and we're trying to still, to get back to that point, which hopefully we'll get to soon when the Messiah comes, going to destroy the evil inclination, and we'll get back to actually where we were, before Adam and Eve had actually eaten from the tree. So this, now when we talk about this impurity, what we call Zehuma, this is what the Haggadah says. Interesting. It says what we say on Passover, that Hashem brought us from Mount Sinai. He brought us to Mount Sinai. Without giving us the Torah, it would have been enough, right? There are 15 statements that we say in the Haggadah. If God had done this, dayenu, right? It would have been enough, But if God would have brought us to Mount Sinai by not giving us the Torah, that would have been enough. What do you mean? Like, if God would have brought us to Mount Sinai, what would have been the point without giving us the Torah? Wow, there's a lot of dust.
Yeah.
Hey, Jewish people, come! What a great experience! Thunder, lightning, nothing else is happening. Great light show. That's it. Nothing else going on. What would have been the purpose? God says, you know what? I'm gonna take you out of Egypt. I'm gonna bring you to the promised land. You're gonna come to the land of Israel. Everything's gonna be great. You're gonna, go through the desert. Gonna have all these nations against you. Don't worry, I'll take care of it. But are you gonna give us anything? Do we get any lollipops? We get any Tootsie Rolls? Like, you gonna give us anything? No, it's okay. I'm gonna take you out. I'm gonna bring you to the mountain. I'm not gonna give you anything. What would have been the purpose? What would have been the purpose of bringing the Jews to Mount Sinai? You're not giving them anything.
Yeah.
So the answer is that standing at Mount Sinai, even without receiving the Torah, would have accomplished one very specific thing. And that would have been the removal of this impurity. The removal of this Zehuma. Because imagine, the nation, we're talking about 2 million people, right? 2 to 3 million people, 600,000 men between the ages of 20 and 60, not including women. So you're talking about 2 to 3 million people in the desert. They all gather around Mount Sinai. Imagine today you have, there's a big wedding, let's say, between, two rebbes, and there are like thousands of people there. So you imagine like thousands of people, standing on the bleachers, or like, the crowding in to be able to, to see something, to hear something. You see the big video screens out there. Yeah, trust me, if you're there, you're finding, a specific place to stand. Otherwise, you're going to be like a sardine. You're just going to be like totally smushed. So imagine the entire nation is by the foot of the mountain. They're standing by the foot of the mountain, and, as it's brought down, the whole purpose of that, even if they didn't get the Torah, would have been to raise themselves to a much higher spiritual level just by being there. How high a spiritual level? The spiritual level of what the world was like before Adam and Eve had eaten from the tree. That means they were doing the will of God. They understood that evil existed. Evil did not exist within them. It was from without, right? To say, wow, that's an interesting statement. What exactly does that mean? So, imagine, a person walks in the forest and he sees a huge pit, right? He sees a huge pit, and it's, he looks down like, wow, if I fall in that, that's going to be pretty dangerous. Probably could break my neck and die. So what does he do? He walks around the pit. He goes in a different direction. He knows that if he walks within that area, he could certainly, fall to his death. So that is the way, one possible way to understand that this evil as they understood it was out there. It wasn't part of them 24/7. When Adam ate from the tree, he put that inside of himself, and he said like this: if I put this evil inclination inside myself, every time I do the right thing, I go up exponentially. In other words, I raise myself to a much, much higher level, in a much shorter time. Because here I have all these different things going on, and I actually do the right thing. But if I do the wrong thing, then not only do I debase my body, but I also debase my soul. So God says, wow, that's a great idea. I definitely agree with that statement. There's only one problem. I didn't create the world for that. That's not what I wanted you to do. Okay, now that you did it, there is a reality. What are the ramifications? Death came to the world. Death is not a Jewish concept. So a person has to go through the death process in order to reach their potential upstairs. Otherwise what will happen is, if Adam and Eve had eaten now from the tree of life, and they're going to live forever, fame, I'm going to live for it, right? If you're going to live forever, that defeats the purpose of what you just did. So what does God say? All right, everyone out of the pool. And he throws everyone out. He throws them out of the Garden of Eden. He puts these fiery angels, as the Torah says, in front of the tree of life, so they can't eat from the tree of life, because what is then going to happen is if they eat from the tree of life and they're going to live forever, well, God says you have to go back to the dust, right? You have to go back to the dust. You have to, that's going to be part of the, the tshuva process, the repentance process by, having your body disintegrate and, reaching that potential. So now, so with that way of explanation or introduction, this zahuma, right, this impurity, the Jewish people now are getting rid of by coming to Mount Sinai. So now going back to our original statement, a non-Jew is going to stay away from his animal. Let's answer that question first. Why is he going to stay away from, from his animal? So it is brought down that if a person, is with their animal, you are going to make it barren. If you have relations with an animal, that is what's going to happen. In other words, if it hooks up with another animal, obviously the same species, it's not going to have offspring, right? So that is certainly a terrible thing. So he's not going to use his own animal. He's going to go and use a Jew's animal because, well, I'll ruin his animal. I don't want to ruin my own. Like, that's bad for business, right? So, if I can't be with my wife, so I'll take his animal. Now, keep in mind, this impurity, this zahuma, is a tremendously heightened level of lust. So a non-Jew is so overcome with lust that he desires even animal. Now you might say, well, that's a terrible statement. It may be. But, in today's day and age, we don't say, people will not say they have to control their urges. A person has to work on themselves. Instead of say, do what you want. You want to do this? It's immoral. It's not immoral. It doesn't matter. You have to fulfill, whatever happiness, that you want. We'll even look at it as being, quote unquote, normative behavior. Go back to the original Tanakh talk on homosexuality. Their group will tell you this is normative behavior. They'll even try and show there's a gene, right? There's a homosexual gene. If you were born that way with that gene, okay, then that's what you're going to be. Nobody says, they're not claiming this is an unnatural urge. They'll say this is totally normal, right? But if it would be totally normal, we wouldn't have a population today.
Right.
Right? It cannot be a totally normal thing, right? Because God says, when he creates woman from man, he says, I want you to cleave to your wife. I want you to cleave to this woman. He doesn't say cleave to a man. Say, wow, he's against homosexuality. Sure is, because it's not natural. It's not a natural inclination. It doesn't matter if if you have more of a tendency. I have a lot of tendencies to a lot of terrible things. I can have an anger gene. I can have an anti-pork gene. I can have an anti-matzah gene. I can have all these genes, that go against what God wants me to do. I haven't even, an anti-getting up early gene to want to pray or to do anything. God says, I don't care. Shut up and eat the matzah. This is what you have to do. Right. So, then you'll say, wow, I'm going to come to your Seder and I have to eat 35 pounds of matzah in 25 seconds to whistle Dixie. Then you're going to ask when bad things happen to good people. Anyway, we're digressing here. The point is that there's a heightened level, of lust. Yeah, this is not necessarily, such a desirable, trait to have, but lust can go crazy, right? And when a person, has that and it's burning inside him, he'll find anything, in general, just to be with instead of, being by himself. So here, the lust was so great that they would even desire animals, as unnatural as that seems. So the Jewish people stand at Mount Sinai. God reveals himself to them, right? You can imagine, the Torah describes it, thunder, lightning, terrified out of their wits. The awe of God himself by bringing his presence there, whatever that means. What did that do? All right, it scared the wits out of them, that's true, but it also weakened their lust, making their lust much more controllable. That's how this zahuma was removed. In other words, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily think that was true. Imagine you see this unbelievable experience. You go through this unbelievable experience, and you're scared out of your wits. Like, wow, my lusts are gone. That's gonna take care of it. No problem. But it's brought down that that their lusts were put into check because God revealed Himself to the Jewish people at Mount Sinai, and whoever is a Jew for all generations, that lust is much less than it would be as a non-Jew. Now I say, oh, now that's a general statement, yeah, but a Jew and a non-Jew, they have different soul makeup. It's not the same, right? It's not the same. They have different purposes. They have different things they have to accomplish, in this world. So therefore, what they have to do is different. So, but it's going to be different by who they are, by their DNA. Say, well, that's not fair. If I was born as a non-Jew, you're going to tell me I have all these things, I have to work on? 100%. If a person becomes a Jew, right? So then that's going to change, right? Their soul makeup, is going to change. At the same time, they don't have to go through conversion, right? A person can be a Noahide and still have a portion of the world to come, but that all is going to be different. So if it's going to be different, then what they do is going to be different. They're going to have, a different purpose. They're going to have different lusts, all these different things. Now that gets to the next question is, okay, now I understand why a non-Jew is going to prefer this animal, the Jewish animal, and not his own animal. But there's a much more basic question, right? You have to answer, the easier question first. And the more basic question is, why is he going to take an animal in the first place? Why is he going to prefer this animal to his wife? Or to any other woman, right? All right, let's say his wife's not available for whatever reason. Why in the world is he going to take this, he's going to take this animal, instead of another woman, be it non-Jew or a Jewish woman? Because there's a principle mentioned in the Talmud itself. Anyone wants to look it up, it's Nedarim 91b, and it says over there from the verse in Proverbs chapter 9 verse 17, the statement over there is Mayim Genuvim Yimtaku, that stolen waters are always sweet, meaning that what one is not allowed to have provides more physical pleasure. In other words, if a person, let's say is married and they have an extramarital affair, why is it so exciting? It's so exciting because it's forbidden, right? It's like having stolen water. So imagine the person divorces their spouse, marries the person that they were with. Most likely they're not going to stay together, forever. Maybe they will, but why won't they stay together? In general, they won't stay together because it's not exciting now. If you have something that you can't have, the desire to have it is much greater. Now, so that's another thing. And now let's get back to the more basic thing of what is this impurity in the first place, right? What is this this impurity of the snake? So the Rambam brings down in his epic work, The Guide for the Perplexed. Guide for the Perplexed was a philosophical work that at the time there were many Jews going astray, because of non-Jewish philosophy of Plato, Aristotle, etc. So he wrote this book called Guide for the Perplexed. He wrote it in Arabic, then it was translated into Hebrew, then translated into English, which is a very, very difficult book to go through because it's written in this philosophical language, but probably a book most people will never see or ever go through because, most people are not, holding by philosophy today. It's all about, as we mentioned up until this point, it's all about desire. It's all about a person controlling desire. That's why people do all kinds of crazy things today. So the Rambam there in the Guide for the Perplexed, chapter 2, paragraph 30 says, and he explains the Medrash, saying that wasn't the snake that seduced Eve. Wow, that's pretty philosophical. What do you mean it wasn't the snake? But rather it was the Satan, Mr. S, or whatever you want to call him, who rode upon the snake who seduced Eve, right? Who tried to get Eve to eat from the tree. So this is what the rabbis mean when they say that the snake himself seduced her and infused her with this impurity. Right? In other words, it's kind of like this hypodermic needle, so to speak, like squeeze it in, and you have like all of a sudden you have these, what we'll call this, this spiritual impurity, etc. And he put this inside her, right? Infused her with this, which remained with her descendants, until the Jewish people stood at Mount Sinai. In other words, the spiritual impurity existed, and existed for another 1,500, 2,000 years, right? Before the Jewish people actually got the Torah. Once they come to Mount Sinai, through that experience, then that impurity goes by the wayside. And this is what the verse means when it says that man overcomes the snake by crushing its head, and the snake overcomes man by biting his heel. See, you have statements like this in the Torah that does not make any logical sense. I mean, if you're telling me that because of their sin, because Adam and Eve ate from the tree, I understand, okay, they have to be punished, the snake gets punished, etc. But what in the world does it mean that man overcomes the snake by crushing its head, right? And the snake overcomes man by biting his heel. Like, what in the world is the connection? So the heel over here what does it allude to? It alludes to the lowliest and most mundane part of the person, right? Because the person walks, what does he walk? Walks on his heels. So Mr. S himself will seduce a person by attracting him through his physical lusts and desires for worldly pleasure. Right? That's what he does. He tries to convince us to do terrible things, by getting as much benefit as possible in this world. In other words, we get distracted very easily. By getting distracted, we don't serve God properly. We're too busy, watching TV, sports, entertainment, all the, whatever it is, by fulfilling our base desires. And, if we go against that, we hold according to Torah, do what we need to do, so that weakens that power. But Mr. S is not going to give up. So we have to use our head, so to speak, to overcome these lusts. So that way, man conquers Mr. S by crushing his head. In other words, we have to go against, all these desires and all these pleasures in order to reach our potential. That's how we do it. Now, the head of Mr. S, what does that refer to? That refers to arrogance. Arrogance arouses within a person to physical lust because he thinks he can do anything. So therefore, he can give in to his base desires, and by giving in his base desires, nothing really matters. He can do whatever he wants. So we mentioned a man's heel, right? His foot, the bottom of his foot, represents his lowliness, represents his mundane qualities. And what can that do? That will destroy him, right? That could actually, destroy him spiritually. It could destroy him physically also. But if he allows arrogance of Mr. S to fill himself with lust for worldly pleasures, it will bring about his downfall. So arrogance, probably, as the Musar's books, Musar meaning ethics, books of ethics, tell us, arrogance is probably the worst character trait a person can have. Why? Because he puts everything out of mind, out of sight, and he does whatever he wants, and he doesn't care. So he doesn't care about himself, doesn't care certainly about others, and he'll do whatever he wants. But if, on the other hand, his lowliness arouses within himself a sense of modesty, and within a sense of humility to try and confront this in front of his Creator, then through this, he is going to be able to overcome this attempt of the snake to seduce him and crush his arrogance. Now, we're living in a physical world. God created us with base desires. Some people have more desires than some things, more desires than other things, whatever it is. And the whole purpose of all these desires, right, is for us to overcome them. You say, wow, like why would God do that? Not only that, but the strongest base desire, that he gives us, is a desire for a man to be with a woman and vice versa. Right now, things might have changed in a certain way unnaturally, right? We'll certainly call it unnatural. But at the same time, that is the strongest base desire that a person has. So if that's true, then you'll say, well, why did God give it to you? He gave it to you to harness it, to control it, to use it when it's supposed to be used, not to abuse it. The people who abuse it, yeah, 100%. But the Torah speaks out many times. You're not allowed to be with this one, not allowed to be with that one. When you get married, that's it. Doesn't mean your desires for other women go by the wayside. Right? But a person's going to have, should have the same desire for his wife, but doesn't mean he's going to become a eunuch all of a sudden. He's going to say, oh, I'm just happy where I am right now. I'm not going to have any of these other desires. That's not true. Right? The desires can go off the charts as well, but it has to be harnessed, in the proper way. So the Rambam adds over there that the word Satan, Mr. S, and the word snake allude to the qualities of Mr. S himself. That means that this nachash, right? That's what a snake is. This nachash is related to the world, and the word nechoshesh, which is similar to the word nachash, which is a metal. That's what it means. It's a metal, represents arrogance and brazenness. So we also know that Amalek, right? Amalek from Haman lore from the book of Esther. Haman comes from the people of Amalek. They are referred to as the beginning of the nations. That's Numbers chapter 24, verse 20. Why are they the beginning of nations? Because they're like the head of the snake. They are the most arrogant of nations who try to arouse other nations to sin. So that's what people say, that there was a command given to King Saul in Samuel chapter 15, Samuel 1 chapter 15. And he's supposed to wipe out all the Amalekites, right? All their kids, everything. And he allows the king to live. The king shacks up with a woman that night. The offspring, of that union is Mr. Haman himself. So this is why they have to be destroyed, because they are most arrogant. They don't believe in God. They believe in this world in the sense that nothing happens out of the ordinary. In other words, stuff happens. There are no miracles. There is no God at the level of cynicism. Certainly that's in the world today. So they have to be destroyed. They have, it might seem like a cruel thing, right, to destroy a whole nation. But at the same time, their poison that they put in this world is bad for everybody, right? It takes God out of the world, so therefore they have to be destroyed, just as man must crush the head of the Nachash, the snake, in order to overcome Mr. S. So the Zahuma of the snake, this impurity, was removed from the Jewish people when God appears at Mount Sinai. He appeared to the Jewish people at Mount Sinai. And the purpose of God's revelation, not just to give them the Torah, right, at Mount Sinai, was that they should have this trait of bashfulness, which would guarantee their humility, prevent them from sinning. And this is what cured the arrogance that the snake infused into man. Now, when you look at that statement, one of the character traits, or a few of the character traits that the Talmud says, about the Jewish people, is that they have the character trait of bashfulness, right? That is one of them. Another character trait is they do acts of loving kindness, right? They help out other people. You see by charity, Jewish people probably, per capita or per number, you look at the percentages of, Jews and how much charity they give, they're greater than anybody combined, of any other ethnic group, about how much they give to charity, how much they help others, etc. So bashfulness is a Jewish quality. Doesn't mean someone can't get those qualities if they want them. Obviously it's going to be much harder if a non-Jew converts. So their soul makeup is going to be a little bit different. But the whole point, on this is that lust has to be controlled, right? And God put it in the world. Yeah, it's a base desire. But even if it's a base desire, I can't do it whenever I want, right? And we spoke about the idea of marriage and the fact that, two people together and the marriage has to stay strong, right? That's why you have family purity laws in order to keep that, marriage going. So so back to what we originally said, a non-Jew has this tremendous, lust, and this lust, is going to make it somewhat uncontrollable. In other words, if the spiritual impurity still exists, within non-Jews, then how could they ever be moral, right? How could you're going to say every non-Jew, has extramarital affairs? I'm not saying that. Certainly, more than 60% of marriages end up in divorce. There's good reason. I was kind of surprised when I looked at statistics that, within the top 5, extramarital affairs aren't there. I thought it would have been like number 1 or number 2. But, at the end of the day, marriage as an institution in the secular world doesn't work, right? It doesn't make sense why people want to get married anyway. But in general, 60% of the people that actually, get married, the people that get married, 60% end in divorce, probably higher, it's probably higher today, even higher than that. But again, so let's look back at this statement. Say, oh, a non-Jew's going to shack up, with an animal, or he's going to take a Jew's animal, even if he can't find a woman. So the base desire to be with somebody can be so, to fulfill that urge can be so great that he doesn't care who it is. It doesn't matter. Hopefully, it'd be better if it'd be a woman, right? But people have all kinds of crazy, desires. Pedophilia is a crazy thing. Sodomy is an absolute crazy thing. You want to say, people more drawn to it, psychologists will tell you it's because they themselves most likely have been sodomized, and that's why they sodomize others. Well, again, whether it's boys or girls, doesn't matter. That's, a totally unnatural desire, but it's definitely out there, and it definitely exists. It's unfortunate and it's tragic, but at the same time, that's a lust also. So you'll say, but non-Jews, you're going to tell me they only have this lust, they can't overcome it? No, that's not true. They can't overcome it, but it's going to take a lot. It's going to take a lot to do that because, the desire is so great. Jews also have to work on it, right? There's no question, about that. And the more Jews do not attach themselves to the Torah and they don't go back to tradition, the more they're going to be in the statistics like non-Jews. They have a different soul makeup. It doesn't matter. It should, guard against that. But if you don't work on that soul makeup, if you don't make it stronger, if you just fill it with all kinds of garbage and all kinds of other things, what that's going to do is you're going to be like everybody else. You are going to fit in the spectrum, of all these statistics, whether it comes to drugs, whether it comes to divorce, comes to, all kinds of negative things. You don't attach yourself to what God wants, this is what's going to happen. So this is what this spiritual impurity is, and this is why a non-Jew would prefer an animal, potentially, to his wife, or potentially, to a woman. So now when you look at this statement, this, crazy statement by the rabbis that, all non-Jews are a suspect on bestiality. What kind of crazy statement is that? So we spent the last, last number of minutes, explaining what the connection is. It's actually, as we've seen from the Rambam, the Rambam brings in the guide for the perplexed, it's a pretty deep concept, of what's going on. It goes back, to quote unquote original sin, which we don't believe in, back to Adam and Eve, goes back to, to the tree of knowledge, goes back to Mount Sinai. This is a huge thing, a much deeper thing than I guarantee you most people probably would have thought of. Look, the Talmud is, anti-non-Jews. Look, they'll even say they'll shack up with all these, with animals. They walk into the room, even the fish don't swim. The fish are going to start looking at it like, don't come near me. It's my fish bowl. Like that's a crazy, that sounds like a crazy thing. But if you break it down, then, we can get some level of understanding. I mean, this is a much deeper level of understanding than certainly meets the eye. So, as we always say, everything's in context, and you have to look beyond of what you see at face value, because at face value, 100%, this makes absolutely no sense when when we look at it, just as that statement by itself. Because there are all kinds of other statements that, the Talmud makes that, also doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. And, when you look at it in context and what it means and what it's driving at, then we can, certainly make heads or tails, certainly of that.
All right. Well, it's pretty much it's pretty much been a full show already. So for all you people out there, be sure to tune in next week. Send us some messages if you have any ideas for controversial issues. I think we probably have one more we're going to cover next week. I guess we'll go over hash over the details soon. So, but anyway, I guess for tonight, that's pretty much going to be a wrap, Rabbi. I know you could probably go. I would say you could go all night, but actually you just woke up, so I can't go all night. So, so with that said, I guess we're just.
Hey, get back on that show! What are you doing?
Thank you all for tuning in. It's good to see you. Be sure to subscribe to the website and the YouTube page, and like us on Facebook. And if you're not a friend of mine on Facebook, send me a friend request. So, shalom to you all. It's good to see you all, and Rabbi, we'll see you next time. Thank you all. Take care. Shalom.
Shalom.
אני אתה אתם תמיד כולם ביחד חשוב מכל חשוב והכרחי